The Harley-Davidson's engine growled, a low, throaty hymn that vibrated through John Harper's bones as he leaned into the curve of Highway 340. The morning sun, sharp and golden, sliced across the Colorado plains, glinting off the motorcycle's rusted chrome. At 82, Harper rode with the precision of a man half his age, his hands steady on the handlebars, his gray eyes scanning the horizon. The 1970s shovelhead was no showpiece, its paint chipped, its frame scarred. But it ran. It always ran. For Harper, that was enough. 10 miles from his farm, the town of Carsonville emerged, a cluster of low buildings framed by the distant Rockies. Harper's routine was unchanging. Fill the tank at Klein's gas station, buy a hydraulic valve for his broken John Deere, return home. 40 years of discipline, forged in jungles and deserts, kept his life ordered. He slowed as the traffic light ahead turned red, the Harley's rumble softening to a steady purr. The gas station's neon sign flickered to his right, and across the street, a diner's windows glowed with early patrons. Normal. Quiet. Until the flash of red and blue pierced his rearview mirror. Harper's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from instinct. Situational awareness, honed over decades, noted the patrol car's angle, the officer stepping out with long, deliberate strides. He killed the engine, the silence heavy, and waited. The officer, a woman in her late 20s, approached, her mirrored sunglasses reflecting Harper's weathered face. Her nameplate read Carter. Her hand rested on her holster, a subtle assertion of control. "Is this some kind of joke?" Officer Emily Carter's voice carried a mocking edge, her lips curling as she stopped beside the bike. "Sir, shut off that relic and step off. Now." Harper did not move. His hands remained on the handlebars, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the plains met the mountains. He had faced worse than this. Ambushes in Vietnam, interrogations in Kabul, but the sting of dismissal, of being reduced to an old man on an old bike, cut deeper than he expected. He exhaled, slow and measured, and reached for his wallet, pulling out his license and registration with deliberate calm. Carter snatched the documents, her eyes narrowing as she read. John Harper, 82 years old. She tilted her head, her tone sharp. "Do you not think you are too old to be riding a motorcycle like this?" Harper's silence was not defiance, but patience, the kind he had shown young recruits who thought they knew the world. Another officer, Michael Torres, joined her, his grin wide as he inspected the Harley. "Man, this thing's older than my father." "Look at that rust." "Hands on the bike, sir. Feet apart," Carter ordered, her voice clipped. The search was unnecessary, a power play, and they both knew it. Harper complied, his movements slow, his dignity intact. His boots scuffed the asphalt, the morning air cool against his calloused hands. A small crowd gathered, diners, shopkeepers, a teenager with a phone, murmurs rippling like wind through grass. "Mr. Harper, where do you live?" Carter asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "Farm off Highway 340, he said, his voice low, steady. "Alone. Alone." Carter exchanged a glance with Torres, a look that said, "Confused old man." "Do you have family? Anyone who takes care of you?" "I have been taking care of myself for 82 years. Carter's jaw tightened. "Yes, but do you not think it is dangerous to ride that bike at your age? You could cause an accident, hurt someone." Harper's eyes flicked to her, then back to the horizon. He could have told her about his annual medical exams, his daily workouts, his reflexes sharper than most men in their 30s. But he owed her no explanation. The crowd grew, their whispers louder. "Poor old guy," one said. "Cops got nothing better to do," said another. Harper closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of their pity heavier than Carter's scorn. Across the street, Robert Klein, 58, paused, wiping down a fuel pump. A Gulf War veteran, he knew Harper's face, his quiet courtesy, the way he always paid cash and asked about Klein's son. 15 years of small talk had built a bond, unspoken but strong. Klein watched Carter's hand hover near her weapon, saw Harper's rigid posture, and felt a fire ignite in his chest. This was wrong. He grabbed the phone behind the counter and dialed Fort Carson. "This is Robert Klein," he said, his voice urgent. "I need an officer on duty, now." Back on the road, Carter's tone sharpened. "Mr. Harper, can you hear me? Do you understand what I am saying?" Her voice rose, drawing more eyes. Torres leaned in, whispering, "I think he might be deaf." "Look at him, just standing there." Harper opened his eyes, his gaze steady. "I am listening." "Then answer me," Carter snapped. "Do you not think it is irresponsible to ride that bike?" Klein's call connected, his words rushed. "We have a veteran being disrespected by local police. John Harper, 82. He is a good man, and they are humiliating him." The officer on the line paused. "Did you say John Harper?" A beat. "Mr. Klein, keep your eyes on him." "We are sending a unit. Do not let them do anything to Mr. Harper until we arrive." Klein stepped closer to the street, his heart pounding. Something big was coming. He could feel it. The morning sun climbed higher, its light harsh now, casting long shadows across the asphalt where John Harper stood, hands clasped behind his back. The Harley-Davidson rested on its kickstand, its rusted frame glinting like a relic of forgotten wars. Officer Emily Carter's voice cut through the murmurs of the growing crowd, her words sharp as she circled Harper. "Mr. Harper, I am speaking to you. Do you understand the risk you pose on that motorcycle?" Her mirrored sunglasses hid her eyes, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her irritation. Harper's face remained impassive, his gray eyes fixed on the distant Rockies. He had stood in worse places, muddy trenches, burning villages, facing men with guns, not words. But this, the public stripping of his dignity, stung in a way bullets never had. His silence was not surrender, but a shield forged in decades of discipline. He felt the crowd's gaze, their whispers weaving a net of pity and judgment. "He looks confused," one said. "Somebody should call his family," another muttered. Harper's fingers twitched, a flicker of the anger he rarely allowed himself to feel. Officer Michael Torres, leaning against the patrol car, tried a softer approach. "Mr. Harper, we are just concerned, you know. A man your age, riding something like that. It could be dangerous. For you, for others." His grin was gone, replaced by a forced sincerity that did not reach his eyes. Harper's gaze shifted to him, brief but piercing, and Torres looked away, scratching his neck. Carter stepped closer, her boots clicking on the pavement. "Hands on the bike again, sir." "We need to check you one more time." The order was unnecessary, a flex of authority, and the crowd sensed it. A woman in a diner apron shook her head, muttering to a man beside her. A teenager's phone stayed raised, capturing every moment. Harper complied, his movements slow, deliberate, his palms pressing against the Harley's warm metal. The bike was more than transport. It was a piece of him, a survivor like he was. Carter's hands patted his jacket, her touch brisk, impersonal. She found nothing, as she knew she would. Across the street, Robert Klein gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles pale. The Fort Carson officer's words echoed in his mind. Do not let them do anything to Mr. Harper. Klein's eyes darted between Harper's rigid form and Carter's aggressive posture. He had seen that look before, in young lieutenants eager to prove themselves, blind to the cost. His own war, the Gulf, had taught him the price of pride. Harper, he knew, was no ordinary man. Not the way he carried himself, not the way he spoke, sparse but precise. Klein hung up and stepped outside, the gas station's bell jingling behind him. He crossed the street, drawn by a need to act, to protect. "Officer Carter," a voice called from the crowd, tentative but firm. A man in a flannel shirt, maybe 50, stepped forward. "Is this really necessary?" "He is just an old man." The words hung in the air, and Carter's head snapped toward him, her sunglasses reflecting his flushed face. "Sir, step back," she said, her voice cold. "This is police business." The man hesitated, then retreated. But the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a tide of unease. Harper heard it, felt it, but kept his eyes on the horizon. He had learned long ago to focus on what he could control. This moment, this humiliation, was not his to end. Carter turned back to Harper, her patience fraying. "Mr. Harper, I am going to need you to come with us to the station. We need to discuss your ability to operate that vehicle safely." Her words were formal, but her tone was sharp, edged with frustration. Torres straightened, sensing the shift, his hand hovering near his radio. "And what for?" Harper's voice was low, steady, the first words he had spoken in minutes. The crowd quieted, leaning in. Klein, now at the edge of the scene, froze, his heart pounding. Harper's calm was unnerving, a stillness that promised something deeper. "For inappropriate behavior and failure to respond properly to a law enforcement officer," Carter said, pausing as if weighing her next words. "And you need a medical evaluation before you ride that motorcycle again." The accusation landed like a slap, and the crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. The teenager's phone trembled, still recording. Harper's eyes met Carter's for the first time, and in that moment, she saw something. Not defiance, not fear, but a weight she could not name. It unnerved her, and she stepped back, her hand tightening on her holster. "Do you understand me, sir?" she pressed, her voice louder now, as if volume could restore her control. "I understand," Harper said, his tone unchanged. "But I am not going." Carter's face flushed, her authority challenged in front of a growing audience. "What do you mean, you are not going?" "This is not a request. It is an order." "Based on what law?" Harper's question was simple, but it cut through her bravado. Carter hesitated, her mind racing. There was no law to detain an elderly man for riding a motorcycle, no regulation mandating a psychiatric evaluation without cause. But she was in too deep now, the crowd's eyes on her, their phones recording. Backing down would mean admitting fault, and Emily Carter did not admit fault. "Elder protection laws," she said, the words rushed, almost desperate. "Behavior that puts your safety at risk." It was a weak justification, and she knew it. Torres shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the crowd. Klein, standing just beyond the circle, felt a surge of admiration for Harper. Whoever this man was, he had steel in his spine. Harper's lips curved, a faint, almost invisible smile. He had heard lies before, from enemies far more cunning, in places far more dangerous. This was nothing. But the crowd felt the shift, the air thickening with anticipation. They sensed something was coming, though they could not name it. Klein's gaze flicked down the road, where the horizon shimmered with heat. His call to Fort Carson had been a gamble, but the officer's urgency had confirmed his instincts. Harper was more than he seemed. Klein's hands clenched, his war-scarred fingers trembling with the need to act. He stepped closer, ready to speak, to intervene, when a low rumble reached his ears. Not the Harley's growl, but something heavier, distant, approaching fast. Carter, oblivious, pressed on. "Mr. Harper, get in the vehicle now, or I will have to use force." Her voice cracked, betraying her nerves. The crowd tensed, a woman clutching her child's hand, a man whispering to his wife. Harper stood unmoved, his silence a wall she could not breach. And then, from the edge of town, the sound grew louder, a deep mechanical roar, like thunder rolling across the plains. Klein's eyes widened. Carter turned, her sunglasses slipping as she squinted down the road. Harper, for the first time, looked too, his grey eyes narrowing. Dust rose in the distance, a cloud kicked up by something massive, unstoppable. The dust cloud swelled on the horizon, a churning veil that swallowed the distant plains as the roar of engines grew louder, sharper, rattling the windows of Carsonville's storefronts. John Harper stood motionless beside his Harley-Davidson, his weathered hands still clasped behind his back, his grey eyes narrowing at the approaching storm. The crowd, now nearly 30 strong, turned as one, their murmurs fading into a tense hush. Officer Emily Carter's hand froze on her holster, her mirrored sunglasses slipping down her nose, revealing eyes wide with uncertainty. Officer Michael Torres stepped closer to her, his radio crackling unanswered. Something was coming, and it was not theirs to control. Carter's voice, moments ago sharp with authority, faltered as she faced Harper again. "Mr. Harper, I am not asking you again. Get in the vehicle now." Her words were meant to command, but they trembled, undercut by the growing rumble from the road. Harper's gaze flicked to her, then back to the horizon, his face unreadable. He had faced moments like this before, moments when the world teetered on the edge of chaos, when a single choice could shift everything. In Vietnam, it had been a sniper's glint in the jungle. In Afghanistan, a whispered order in the dark. Here, it was the weight of a young officer's pride, and he knew it would break her before it broke him. "Officer Carter," Harper said, his voice low, deliberate. "You are making a mistake." The words were not a threat, but a warning, spoken with the calm of a man who had seen too many battles to fear this one. Carter flinched, her face flushing red, the crowd's eyes boring into her. She could feel their judgment, their phones still recording, capturing her every misstep. She was 28, 3 years on the force, and she had fought to prove herself in a town that still saw her as the girl who barely passed the academy. This old man, this stubborn relic, was unraveling her authority, and she could not let it stand. "Enough!" she snapped, stepping closer, her hand now gripping her holstered weapon. "You are coming with us for a psychiatric evaluation. Your refusal is proof you are not fit to be on that motorcycle." The accusation hung heavy, drawing gasps from the crowd. A woman in a floral dress clutched her purse, whispering, "That is too far." A man with a grey beard shook his head, muttering, "She is out of line." Harper's faint smile returned, a flicker of recognition. He had seen this before, youth mistaking power for wisdom, pride for strength. Across the street, Robert Klein's heart pounded. His war-scarred hands clenched at his sides. The Fort Carson officer's words, "Do not let them do anything to Mr. Harper." echoed in his mind. Urgent, commanding. Klein had fought in the Gulf, had seen men broken by war and rebuilt by honor. Harper, he knew, was one of those men, though he had never spoken of it. The rumble from the road was no longer distant. It was close, a mechanical growl that vibrated through the asphalt. Klein's eyes locked on the horizon, where shapes emerged from the dust. Humvees, at least a dozen, their olive-green hulls cutting through the haze like predators. Carter, oblivious to the approaching force, pressed her advantage, her voice rising. "Mr. Harper, you are putting yourself and others at risk. I am detaining you under elder protection laws, and if you resist, I will use force." Her hand moved to her cuffs, the metal glinting in the sun. Torres, sensing the escalation, touched her arm, his voice low. "Emily, maybe we should—" "No," she cut him off, her eyes blazing. "He is not walking away from this." The crowd shifted, their unease palpable. A teenager lowered his phone, his face pale. A woman called out, "Leave him alone." But Carter ignored her, her focus locked on Harper. Harper's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. "You do not know what you are doing," he said, his voice soft but weighted with a lifetime of scars. Carter's breath caught, her confidence cracking under the intensity of his gaze. She saw something in his eyes, not anger, not fear, but a depth she could not fathom, a story she had no right to judge. It shook her, but she was too far gone to stop. The roar of the Humvees drowned her next words, the vehicles screeching to a halt in a semicircle around the scene, their engines idling like a chorus of beasts. Dust billowed, stinging the crowd's eyes, coating Harper's Harley in a fine layer. The crowd parted, some stepping back, others craning their necks. Klein exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in minutes. They were here. Doors slammed and boots hit the ground. 50 soldiers, their uniforms crisp, their faces stern, forming a silent wall behind the lead vehicle. From the front Humvee, a man emerged, his presence commanding, his silver hair catching the sun. Captain William Pierce, 55, 22 years of service, strode forward, his eyes locked on Harper. He stopped 3 meters away and snapped a salute, his hand sharp against his brow. "Colonel Harper," Pierce said, his voice clear, resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. The word colonel struck like a thunderclap. Carter's hand fell from her cuffs, her sunglasses slipping further, her mouth open. Torres froze, his radio forgotten. The crowd gasped, a collective jolt of realization. Klein's lips curved into a grim smile, his instincts vindicated. Harper returned the salute, a slow, precise motion, his face still impassive, but his eyes alive with something new, recognition perhaps, or relief. Pierce turned to Carter, his gaze cold, unyielding. "Who dared to stop Colonel Harper?" His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of authority earned through decades of command. Carter stammered, her earlier bravado gone. I am Officer Carter, local police. We stopped this gentleman because—" "This gentleman?" Pierce's tone was sharp, his eyes narrowing. The soldiers behind him took a synchronized step forward, their boots echoing on the asphalt, an unspoken show of loyalty. Carter stepped back, her hands trembling. Torres tried to intervene, his voice weak. "We were just doing our job, sir." "Your job?" Pierce's eyes flicked to Torres, then back to Carter, his words measured but searing. "You stopped a man who served 3 tours in Vietnam, who trained hundreds of soldiers, including myself. You disrespected a living legend." He paused, letting the words sink in. And you thought you could judge him by his age and his bike? Carter's face burned, her authority shattered. The crowd's whispers turned to murmurs of awe, their phones now capturing a different story. Harper stood silent, his gaze returning to the horizon, as if the spectacle around him was merely noise. But inside, the weight of the moment pressed against him. The vindication, yes, but also the exhaustion of being seen, of having his scars laid bare. The Humvee's engines idled, a low growl that mirrored the tension in the air. Pierce stepped closer to Harper, his voice softening. "Colonel, what do you need?" It was a question, not a command, a gesture of respect that hung heavy in the silence. Harper's eyes met Pierce's, and for the first time, he spoke with a trace of warmth. "Nothing, Captain, but thank you." The crowd watched, breathless, as the soldiers formed a corridor, their rifles at rest, but their presence a wall of honor. Harper's Harley waited, its rusted frame suddenly noble, a testament to a life unbroken. But the moment was not over, and Carter's reckoning was only beginning. The air in Carsonville thickened, heavy with dust and the low growl of idling Humvees. The semicircle of military vehicles framed the scene like a stage, their olive-green hulls glinting under the midday sun. 50 soldiers stood in formation, their faces carved with discipline, their eyes fixed on John Harper, who remained beside his Harley-Davidson, its rusted chrome now a symbol of defiance. The crowd, swollen to nearly 40, held their breath, phones trembling in their hands as they recorded the unfolding drama. Officer Emily Carter stood frozen, her sunglasses dangling from one hand, her authority shattered by Captain William Pierce's words. "Colonel Harper." Officer Michael Torres shifted beside her, his face pale, his radio silent. Pierce's gaze bore into Carter, his silver hair catching the light as he stepped forward, his boots deliberate on the asphalt. "You disrespected a man who gave 60 years to this country," he said, his voice low but resonant, each word a blade. Colonel Harper served 3 tours in Vietnam, led intelligence operations in the Gulf, trained officers in Afghanistan. He holds 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a Distinguished Service Cross. He paused, letting the weight of Harper's honors sink into the crowd, into Carter, into the very air. "This man is a legend in the United States Army. And you thought you could judge him by his age?" Carter's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she clutched her sunglasses. She was 28, a small-town officer who had clawed her way through the academy, driven by a need to prove she was more than her father's shadow, a man who had left her mother with nothing but debts. She had faced drunks, thieves, even armed suspects. But this moment, this public unraveling, was a wound she could not staunch. Her eyes darted to Harper, who stood unmoved, his gray eyes scanning the horizon as if the spectacle around him was a distant echo. She wanted to speak, to salvage something, but her voice failed her. Torres cleared his throat, his voice weak. "Sir, we did not know he was military. We were just trying to protect the public." His words sounded hollow, a plea for mercy that Pierce ignored. The soldiers behind him remained still, their presence a silent rebuke. The crowd's murmurs grew, their tone shifting from pity to reverence. "A war hero," a woman whispered. "They humiliated him," a man muttered, his phone still raised. The teenager who had filmed the entire ordeal zoomed in on Harper, his face a mixture of awe and guilt. Pierce turned back to Harper, his posture softening, his voice carrying a warmth reserved for equals. "Colonel, is there anything you need? An escort? Transportation?" The question was not just courtesy, but a ritual, a recognition of Harper's place in a brotherhood forged in blood and sacrifice. Harper's eyes met Pierce's, and for a moment, the weight of 60 years, jungles, deserts, the faces of fallen comrades, flashed across his face. He shook his head, his voice steady. "No, Captain, but I am grateful you came." The soldiers moved as one, forming a corridor of honor, their boots scuffing the asphalt in perfect unison. The crowd parted, some stepping onto the sidewalk, others craning their necks to see Harper's next move. Klein, standing at the edge of the scene, felt his chest tighten. He had known Harper for 15 years, shared coffee, talked about tractors and weather, but never this, never the truth of who Harper was. The Gulf War had left Klein with scars, physical and otherwise, but Harper's silence about his own battles now felt like a sacred trust. One Klein had unknowingly honored by making that call to Fort Carson. Carter's voice broke the silence, small and unsteady. "Colonel Harper, I am sorry. I did not know." Her words were a confession, raw and desperate, but they hung unanswered. Harper's gaze remained on the horizon, his silence louder than any rebuke. The crowd watched, their phones capturing the officer's faltering apology, the soldier's unwavering formation, the old man who had become something more. Pierce stepped closer to Carter, his voice low, controlled. "Officer, you did not just disrespect Colonel Harper. You disrespected every veteran who carries scars you cannot see." He gestured to the soldiers behind him, their faces a mosaic of youth and experience. "This man trained me. He trained hundreds of us. His lessons saved lives, and you thought you could reduce him to an old man on an old bike?" The words were not shouted, but delivered with a precision that cut deeper than anger. Carter's face burned, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Torres tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were doing our job, sir." "Protecting and serving." Pierce's eyes flicked to him, unyielding. "Your job is to protect, not to humiliate. You failed today." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their phones now a chorus of clicks and flashes. The narrative had shifted, and Carter felt it, their reverence for Harper, their condemnation of her. She wanted to run, to hide, but her boots felt rooted to the asphalt. Harper moved at last, stepping toward his Harley. The crowd watched, breathless, as he ran a hand over the bike's handlebars, his touch almost reverent. The machine was old, scarred, but it had carried him through decades, through grief, through solitude. He swung a leg over the seat, his movements fluid despite his age, and started the engine. The Harley's roar shattered the silence, a primal pulse that vibrated through the ground, through the crowd, through Carter's chest. The soldiers stood taller, their corridor a path of honor, as Harper prepared to ride. Pierce saluted again, his hand steady. "We will always be here, Colonel. Always." The soldiers echoed the salute, 50 hands rising as one, their faces alight with pride. Harper nodded, a single, measured gesture, and eased the Harley forward. The crowd parted further, some clapping, others wiping tears, their phones following him like lanterns in the dark. The teenager whispered, "That is a hero," his voice cracking. Carter watched, her hands limp at her sides, as Harper rode through the corridor of soldiers, the Harley's rumble fading into the distance. The Humvee's engines growled to life, the soldiers climbing aboard, their mission complete. Pierce gave Carter one last look, not anger, but disappointment, a weight she would carry long after this day. The vehicles pulled away, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Klein approached Carter, his voice gruff but kind. "You did not know, officer, but you should have asked." He turned and walked back to his gas station, the bell jingling as he disappeared inside. The crowd began to disperse, their whispers now stories they would tell for years, about the old man, the soldiers, the officer who learned too late. Carter stood alone, the asphalt warm beneath her boots, the weight of her mistake pressing against her chest. Torres touched her shoulder, but she shook him off, her eyes fixed on the spot where Harper had vanished. She had wanted to protect, to prove herself, but she had broken something instead, something she could not yet name. Far down Highway 340, Harper rode, the wind sharp against his face, the Harley's roar a steady hymn. He did not look back. The town, the soldiers, the officer, they were behind him now. But the weight of the moment lingered, a reminder of battles fought, of scars unseen, of a life that still had roads to travel. The sun dipped low over Carsonville, painting the plains in hues of amber and shadow, as John Harper's Harley-Davidson rumbled down Highway 340. The town's clamor faded behind him, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the whistle of wind against his weathered jacket. His farm lay ahead, a quiet haven of rolling fields and a whitewashed house, but his mind lingered on the morning's events, the soldiers' salutes, the crowd's awe, Officer Carter's faltering apology. At 82, Harper had no need for vindication, yet the weight of being seen, truly seen, stirred something deep within him, a mix of pride and weariness. He leaned into a curve, the Harley steady beneath him, and let the road carry him home. In Carsonville, the gas station's neon sign flickered to life, casting a pale glow over the now empty street. Robert Klein stood behind the counter, wiping a rag over the same spot, his thoughts on Harper. The call to Fort Carson had been instinct, a debt repaid to a man who had never asked for anything. Klein's Gulf War scars, shrapnel in his leg, nightmares of desert fire, had taught him to recognize resilience in others. Harper's silence, his calm in the face of humiliation, was more than stoicism. It was the mark of a man who had carried burdens too heavy for most. Klein hung the rag and turned off the pump lights, the bell jingling as he locked up for the night. At the Carsonville police station, a squat brick building on Main Street, Sheriff Daniel Reed sat at his desk, the phone pressed to his ear. The voice on the other end was Captain William Pierce, his tone measured but firm. "Sheriff Reed, we need to address this morning's incident with Colonel Harper." Reed, 52, with 15 years as sheriff, leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on a stack of reports. He had known Emily Carter for 5 years, a dedicated officer, quick to act, sometimes too quick. The incident was a misstep, not a crime, but Pierce's call carried the weight of military authority, and Reed knew the stakes were higher than a local precinct's pride. "I am aware, Captain," Reed said, his voice calm but cautious. "I have spoken with Officers Carter and Torres. They made a mistake in judgment." He hesitated, choosing his words. "May I be frank? My officers were trying to do their job, but they misread the situation." Pierce's response was swift, unyielding. "Sheriff, Colonel Harper does not want revenge. He is not suing, not pressing charges. But the military cannot accept our veterans being treated this way. Your officers need to understand what it means to serve, to sacrifice." The words landed like stones, and Reed nodded, though Pierce could not see it. He understood the message: political pressure, institutional expectations, consequences that rippled beyond Carsonville. "What do you suggest?" Reed asked, his pen poised over a notepad. "A training program," Pierce said. "Your officers will visit Fort Carson, learn from our instructors, understand the lives of those who serve." "It will be a partnership, Sheriff, but it is not optional." Reed scribbled the details, his mind already on the logistics, the optics, the need to protect his team while meeting the military's demands. He agreed, and the call ended, leaving him staring at the precinct's faded walls, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. Across town, Emily Carter sat in her patrol car, parked in an empty lot behind the diner. The engine was off, the windows cracked, the evening air cool against her face. Her uniform felt tight, her badge heavy, as she replayed the day's events. Her mocking tone, Harper's steady gaze, the soldier's arrival. The word colonel still echoed, a rebuke to her arrogance. She was not cruel, she told herself. She had wanted to protect, to prove she could handle the job, to silence the whispers that she was too young, too green. But she had humiliated a man who deserved reverence, and the shame burned deeper than any reprimand. Torres had tried to talk to her, his voice gentle as they left the scene. "Emily, you could not have known. Let it go." But she had brushed him off, unable to face his pity. Now, alone, she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her father's voice crept into her mind. "You will never be enough," a ghost from a childhood of broken promises. She had joined the force to prove him wrong, to make a difference, but today she had failed. Harper's words, "You do not know what you are doing," cut deeper than Pierce's condemnation. She had judged him by his age, his bike, his silence, and she had been wrong. At Harper's farm, the Harley's engine fell silent as he parked under a sprawling oak. The White House stood quiet, its porch rocking chairs still, the garden vibrant with marigolds and roses. He dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel, and walked to the barn where his John Deere tractor waited, its hydraulic system still broken. The work was familiar, grounding, a way to quiet the memories that surfaced today. Comrades lost in Vietnam, orders given in the Gulf, the weight of lives in his hands. He slid under the tractor, wrench in hand, the scent of oil and earth steadying him. The world could judge him, but here, in the rhythm of work, he was whole. Back at the station, Reed called Carter and Torres into his office. The room was small, cluttered with files and a coffee-stained desk, but Reed's presence filled it. "You two made a mess today," he said, his voice even but firm. "Colonel Harper is a war hero, and you treated him like a liability. The military is involved now, and we are implementing changes." He outlined Pierce's training program, watching Carter's face, pale, drawn, but attentive. Torres nodded, his usual ease subdued. "Sheriff," Carter said, her voice low, "I want to make this right. I need to." Reed studied her, seeing the weight she carried, the sincerity in her eyes. He nodded, dismissing them, but as Carter left, he called after her. "Emily, learn from this. You are better than today." Carter drove home, the town's lights blurring past, her mind on Harper. She did not know how to fix what she had broken, but she knew she had to try. The road to his farm was out there, and tomorrow she would take it. Harper, now in his kitchen, poured coffee into a blue ceramic mug, the steam rising in the dim light. He sat at the wooden table, his hands tracing its worn grain, and looked out at the pasture where his cows grazed under the fading sky. The day had ended, but its echoes lingered, a reminder that his story, like his Harley, still had miles to go. The morning sun spilled across John Harper's farm, gilding the dew-soaked grass, and casting long shadows from the oak where his Harley-Davidson rested. Inside the whitewashed house, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee, its warmth curling from two blue ceramic mugs on the wooden table. Harper sat across from Officer Emily Carter, his grey eyes steady, his hands folded around his mug. Carter, in civilian clothes, a navy sweater, jeans, shifted in her chair, her fingers tracing the mug's rim. The silence between them was not tense, but heavy, weighted with the events of the previous day and the words yet to be spoken. Carter had driven to the farm at dawn, her patrol car left at home, her badge tucked away. The road to Highway 340 had felt longer than its 10 miles, each curve a reminder of her mistake. Her mocking tone, her hand on her holster, the crowd's gasps. She had rehearsed her apology, but now, in Harper's kitchen, the words felt inadequate. The man before her was no longer just an old man on a rusty bike. He was Colonel Harper, a war hero whose silence had humbled her. She cleared her throat, her voice soft but resolute. "Colonel Harper, I came to talk, if that is all right with you." Harper nodded, his expression unreadable. "Want some coffee?" "Just made a fresh pot." His offer was simple, but it carried a quiet invitation, a bridge across the divide between them. He rose, poured the coffee, and sat again, motioning for her to speak. The kitchen was modest, its walls adorned with faded photos. A younger Harper in uniform, a group of soldiers laughing, a woman with a gentle smile. Carter's eyes lingered on them, sensing the stories they held. "Colonel," she began, her voice steadying, "I owe you an apology. What I did yesterday, stopping you, assuming you were a danger, was wrong. I judged you by your age, your bike, and I humiliated you in front of everyone. I'm so sorry." The words spilled out, raw and unguarded, and she looked at him, searching for a reaction. Harper sipped his coffee, his gaze drifting to the window, where his cows grazed in the pasture, their movements slow under the morning light. He set the mug down, his voice low, deliberate. "Officer Carter, may I ask you a question?" She nodded, surprised by the shift. "Why did you become a police officer?" The question caught her off guard, piercing the armor she had built over years of proving herself. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice softer now. "I wanted to help people, to make a difference in Carsonville. Growing up, my father, he was not a good man. He left us with nothing, and I swore I would be more, do more." She paused, her fingers tightening around the mug. "But yesterday I failed at that." Harper's eyes met hers, not with judgment, but with understanding, the kind forged in moments of hard-won clarity. "And how many accidents caused by elderly drivers have you responded to?" he asked, his tone gentle but pointed. Carter blinked, her mind racing. "Very few," she admitted. "Most accidents I see are younger drivers, speeding, texting, drunk." The truth settled between them, stark and undeniable. She had assumed Harper was the problem, not because of evidence, but because of her own bias, her need to assert control. "Then why did you assume I was the problem?" Harper's question was not accusing but curious, an invitation to confront her own reasoning. Carter looked down, her face flushing. The answer was too obvious, too painful. She had seen an old man, a rusty bike, and made a snap judgment, fueled by her insecurity, her need to prove she was enough. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw your age, not you. And I am sorry." Harper stood and walked to the window, his boots soft on the worn floorboards. He looked out at the pasture, the marigolds glowing in the garden, the John Deere tractor parked by the barn. "Respect is not earned by a uniform or a rank," he said, his voice steady, resonant. "It is earned by how you treat others, no matter their age, no matter what you think you know." He turned to her, his eyes carrying the weight of decades. Wars fought, lives lost, lessons learned. "You are young, officer. You will make mistakes. But you can choose what you learn from them." Carter nodded, her throat tight. She looked at the Harley outside, its rusted frame a testament to endurance, to a life that still moved forward. "That bike," she said, almost to herself. "It has been with you longer than I have been alive." Harper's faint smile returned, a flicker of warmth. "It still works," he said. "Still gets me where I need to go." The words landed softly, but they carried a deeper truth. About Harper, about resilience, about the roads they both still had to travel. Carter stood, her coffee untouched, and extended her hand. "Thank you, Colonel, for this and for everything." Harper shook her hand, his grip firm, his eyes steady. "Keep learning, officer." "That is all I ask." She left the house, the porch rocking chairs creaking in the breeze, and walked to her car. The farm felt alive around her, the hum of insects, the scent of earth, the distant lowing of cows. As she drove away, the Harley's silhouette lingered in her rearview mirror, a reminder of the man she had misjudged, and the lesson she would carry forward. Back at the farm, Harper returned to the barn, sliding under the tractor with his wrench. The hydraulic system was nearly fixed, each bolt a small victory, a tether to the present. The morning's conversation had not changed him, but it had stirred something, a sense that his story, his scars, could still shape others. He tightened a valve, the metal cool against his fingers, and thought of the soldiers who had saluted him, of Carter's earnest eyes, of the roads yet to come. In Carsonville, Carter parked at the station, her mind clearer, her purpose renewed. She would face Sheriff Reed, her colleagues, the training at Fort Carson. But she would do so with a new understanding, not just of Harper, but of herself. The precinct's doors loomed ahead, and she stepped forward, ready to begin again. Harper's farm fell quiet, the sun climbing higher, the Harley waiting under the oak. The world moved on, but here, in this small corner of Colorado, a lesson had taken root, one of respect, of humility, of stories unseen. And for John Harper, that was enough. The Fort Carson training grounds sprawled under a wide Colorado sky, the morning air sharp with the scent of pine and diesel. A line of Carsonville police officers, their uniforms crisp, stood at attention as a military instructor, a wiry sergeant with 20 years of service, paced before them. Officer Emily Carter, near the center, kept her eyes forward, her posture rigid. 1 week had passed since the incident on Main Street, since the Humvees roared into town, since Colonel John Harper's legacy upended her world. The training program, mandated by Captain William Pierce, was no mere formality. It was a reckoning, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Carter's hands tightened at her sides, her heart steady but heavy with purpose. The sergeant's voice boomed, cutting through the morning chill. "You are here to learn what it means to serve, to sacrifice, to carry scars you cannot see. Every person you meet on the street has a story, and it is your job to respect it." His words echoed Harper's lesson in the farm kitchen, and Carter felt them settle deep, a reminder of her apology, of the coffee mugs, of the Harley under the oak. Beside her, Officer Michael Torres shifted, his usual ease tempered by the weight of the moment. The other officers, some skeptical, others attentive, listened as the sergeant recounted stories of veterans, of battles fought, of lives like Harper's that shaped the nation. Carter's mind lingered on the man himself, his gray eyes, his quiet strength, and she vowed to carry his lesson forward. In Carsonville, the police station buzzed with a new energy. Sheriff Daniel Reed stood before a gathered precinct, his voice firm as he outlined the new protocol for field encounters. We ask before we assume. We listen before we judge. Every person deserves dignity, especially our elderly, our veterans. The words were a direct response to the incident, a framework built from Pierce's demands and Carter's mistake. Reed's eyes swept the room, landing on Carter, who stood at the back, her face composed, but her eyes alight with resolve. She had spoken at the meeting's start, her voice steady as she admitted her error, her words echoing Harper's. Every person we stop carries a story. The officers had listened, some nodding, others silent, but the message had landed. Change was here. Carter stepped forward now, her voice clear. Colleagues, I made a mistake with Colonel Harper. I disrespected a man who deserves our admiration. But I learned something bigger than protocols. I learned about human dignity, about seeing the person, not the surface. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. This training at Fort Carson, this new approach, it is not just about avoiding mistakes. It is about being better for our town, for each other. Reed nodded, a rare flicker of pride crossing his face. The precinct murmured agreement, and Carter stepped back, her shoulders lighter, her path clearer. Miles away, on Highway 340, John Harper's farm basked in the midday sun. The White House stood serene, its porch rocking chairs still, the garden vibrant with marigolds and roses. Harper knelt beside his John Deere tractor, the hydraulic system now fixed, its engine purring as he tested it. Grease stained his coveralls, his hands steady as they worked, the rhythm of labor a quiet anchor. The Harley-Davidson rested under the oak, its rusted chrome catching the light, a silent partner in a life of endurance. Harper paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked across the pasture where his cows grazed, their movements slow, eternal. The events of the past week, the stop, the soldiers, Carter's visit, had not changed him, but they had stirred something, a reminder that his story still mattered. He thought of the young recruits he had trained, their faces blurred by time, and of Carter, her earnest apology, her willingness to learn. He had no need for accolades, no desire for revenge, but the knowledge that his life, his scars, could shape another's path brought a quiet satisfaction. He stood, his boots crunching on gravel, and walked to the Harley, running a hand over its handlebars. It still worked, it still carried him, and that was enough. In Carsonville, Carter drove her patrol car down Main Street, the gas station's neon sign flickering to her right. Robert Klein, behind the counter, waved as she passed, a small gesture of respect. She nodded back, her mind on the training, the new protocols, the weight of her badge. The town felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. She thought of her father, his voice no longer a ghost but a shadow she had outgrown. She was enough, not because she was perfect, but because she was learning, growing, striving to be better. At Fort Carson, the training session ended, the officers dispersing to their vehicles, their faces thoughtful. Torres clapped Carter's shoulder, his grin returning. "You did good today, Emily." Harper would be proud. She smiled, a rare softness in her eyes, and climbed into her car. The road back to Carsonville stretched ahead, and she drove with purpose, the Rockies rising in the distance, a testament to endurance. Harper, now in his kitchen, poured coffee into a blue ceramic mug, the steam rising as he sat at the wooden table. The photos on the wall, a younger him, his comrades, his late wife, watched over him, their stories woven into his own. He looked out at the pasture, the tractor, the Harley, and felt the rhythm of his life, unbroken, unending. The world would move on, but here, in this small corner of Colorado, a lesson had taken root. One of respect, of humility, of stories unseen. Carter, back in Carsonville, parked at the station and stepped out, the evening air cool against her face. She looked toward Highway 340, where Harper's farm lay, and felt a quiet resolve. The road ahead was long, but she would walk it with dignity, with purpose, with the lesson of a man whose Harley still roared, whose life still mattered. And somewhere, on that road, John Harper rode, the wind sharp against his face, the horizon wide and open. His story, like his bike, had miles to go, and the world, for all its judgments, could not stop him. Deputies mocked the biker's uniform. 5 minutes later, the U.S. military showed up.